All right, let's dive right into this explainer and explore a truly fascinating topic: how humanity's foundational texts capture that universal, deep-seated desire to reach out to the unknown. When you look at ancient biblical texts, you aren't just looking at dry history or abstract theology, you are actually looking at a masterclass in human communication. Whether they're dealing with catastrophic crises, just overwhelming guilt, or awe-inspiring wonder, these ancient writers recorded a sort of divine dialogue that absolutely still resonates with us today.
So rather than just reading a chronological timeline, we're going to trace a thematic journey. Here is our agenda. We'll be exploring the weight of repentance, bold intercession, divine deliverance, covenants, the ultimate intercessor, and finally, cosmic majesty. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The weight of repentance. Reaching out from the dust.
We are going to begin at the absolute lowest points of the human experience portrayed in the text, when leaders take on the immense, crushing guilt of their entire nations. This is about reaching out to the Creator from the literal dust. Just look at the raw emotion captured in this quote from the book of Ezra. Upon learning his people had adopted corrupt practices, Ezra doesn't just offer up a quiet apology. No, he physically tears his clothing and pulls hair from his head and beard. It's this dramatic physical manifestation of national shame. And we see the exact same thing with the prophet Daniel, pleading in literal sackcloth and ashes.
Now notice the stark contrast here between two totally different modes of communication. On one hand, we have the sweeping, dramatic public repentance of Old Testament figures like Ezra and Daniel, weeping in the public square wearing rough sackcloth for everyone to see. But then, hundreds of years later, Jesus instructs his followers in the Gospel of Matthew to do the exact opposite. He tells them to go into their room, close the door, and pray to the Father in secret. He strictly warns them not to perform their piety publicly just to get noticed. It's a fascinating, massive shift from national spectacle to intimate, personal connection.
Moving on to Section 2. Bold intercession. Negotiating with the divine.
It's wild because these texts show humans didn't just apologize to the divine, they actually stood up and negotiated. Take Abraham's famous countdown for Sodom, for example. God reveals he's going to judge the city, and Abraham steps right in and literally haggles the divine down. He starts at 50 righteous people and works his way all the way down to just 10, desperately trying to save the city from destruction. Honestly, it reads less like a prayer and way more like a high-stakes real estate negotiation. And right in the middle of that negotiation, Abraham challenges God with this incredibly profound question: will not the judge of all the earth do right? Think about the audacity here for a second. A human being, made of dust and ashes, is boldly holding the ultimate cosmic judge to a standard of fairness, basically arguing that it is fundamentally unjust to sweep away the righteous along with the wicked.
We see this kind of bold mediation again with Moses. The text frequently uses this very vivid term, stiff-necked, which is a divine descriptor for the sheer stubbornness of the Israelites after they leave Egypt. God essentially tells Moses to step aside so he can just destroy them, but Moses urgently steps into the gap. He argues, he mediates, and ultimately this leads to an incredibly intimate moment where Moses begs for assurance by actually seeing God's glory. And what happens? He's hidden in the cleft of a rock, covered by the divine hand, and allowed only to see God's back as his goodness passes by.
All right, Section 3. Cries for divine deliverance, where the battle is not yours.
The narrative really peaks when human helplessness meets overwhelming, impossible odds. Across massive spans of time, the biblical narrative shows this incredibly consistent pattern of crisis followed by deliverance. During the Exodus, you've got Moses leading the people through the Red Sea as the surging waters literally congeal like a wall. Jump to the kingdom era, and King David is penning psalms, crying out in anguish, poetically comparing his enemies to roaring lions and strong bulls of Bashan totally encircling him. And later, during the divided monarchy, King Jehoshaphat faces a terrifying, massive coalition army. Faced with this unstoppable army, King Jehoshaphat relies entirely on divine dialogue. His brilliant, highly unusual military strategy? Well, he appoints singers. Seriously, he literally sends a choir out ahead of his armed men into a potential bloodbath, chanting, "Give thanks to the Lord, for his love endures forever." And the text tells us that the moment they began to sing and praise, the divine set ambushes and the enemy armies actually turned on each other and utterly destroyed themselves before Judah even arrived on the scene.
The aftermath of that crazy battle really comes down to a single number: 3.
Because the enemy had completely annihilated themselves, it took Jehoshaphat's men 3 entire days just to collect all the immense plunder of equipment, clothing, and valuables left behind in the desert. It is the ultimate picture of that famous biblical promise, the battle is not yours, but God's.
Which leads us to Section 4, Covenants and Eternal Promises. Think of these as divine contracts.
Next, we're looking at how these dramatic cries for help and these incredible moments of deliverance solidify into formal agreements. This brings us right to King Solomon's prayer at the dedication of the First Temple. Solomon stands before the altar and outlines what is, for all intents and purposes, a comprehensive legal and spiritual contract. He systematically goes through every conceivable future crisis for Israel, from famine and plague to defeat and captivity. He sets up this framework where if the people experience these disasters and turn their faces back toward this temple in prayer, the divine is contractually bound to hear from heaven and forgive.
But here's the thing. This whole temple framework was built upon a massive, unconditional promise made to Solomon's father, King David. Through Nathan the prophet, the divine promises that David's lineage and throne will be established forever. This fundamentally shifts the very nature of God's presence among the people, moving from a temporary wandering tent in the wilderness to a permanent house. And this specific promise anchors the entire biblical hope for the future, setting the stage for a coming successor who's going to eternally mediate between heaven and earth.
Section 5, the ultimate intercessor, the theological climax of the New Testament.
So here, all the previous modes of prayer, intercession, and deliverance we've talked about find their ultimate focus and fulfillment in a single figure, Christ. Remember how we contrasted public weeping with secret prayer a bit earlier? Well, Jesus not only changes where to pray, but how. He tells his followers, look, don't babble on with many words like the pagans do. Instead, he gives them this incredibly elegant, concise 5-step pattern to communicate with the Father. Honor the divine name, align with the divine will, ask for daily sustenance, seek mutual forgiveness, and request protection from evil. It is just elegantly simple, yet it covers absolutely every human need.
But Christ doesn't just teach his followers to pray, he actually prays for them. In what is known as his high priestly prayer in the Gospel of John, Christ asks the Father not to take his followers out of the world, but to protect them right in the middle of it. His ultimate goal is absolute unity. He prays, I in them and you in me. He's stepping up as the ultimate intercessor, totally bridging the gap between the dust of the earth and the perfection of heaven.
And then the Apostle Paul takes this idea and just blows it up to a cosmic scale in his letter to the Colossians. Paul's poetic declaration elevates this intercessor to a level of absolute cosmic supremacy. Christ is described as the very image of the invisible God, the one through whom all things, visible and invisible, thrones and powers, were created. He is literally the glue holding the entire universe together, reconciling all things through his physical body. The dialogue is now moved from a local, physical temple to the actual fabric of the universe itself.
Finally, Section 6, Songs of Cosmic Majesty, going from the dust all the way up to the stars. When humans look up from their daily crises, they use this soaring, poetic imagery to praise the Creator's raw, terrifying, and beautiful majesty. Psalm 104 is an absolute masterpiece of this. The psalmist weaves this breathtaking tapestry declaring, he makes the clouds his chariot and rides on the wings of the wind. The text describes a creator who wraps himself in light like a garment and is so intimately involved in creation that even the young roaring lions seek their food directly from his hand. When he opens his hand, they're satisfied. When he hides his face, they're terrified.
Which brings us to one of the most powerful juxtapositions in all the texts, found in the book of the prophet Habakkuk. On one hand, we have Habakkuk's terrifying vision of divine power, God marching out, literally shaking the earth, crumbling ancient mountains, and churning the sea. It's an image of overwhelming, earth-shattering power. But contrasted with that, in the face of an impending national collapse, Habakkuk makes a stunning declaration. He says even if the fig tree fails to bud, the olive crop totally fails, and the fields produce absolutely zero food, he will quietly and unshakably rejoice in the Lord. He pairs the terrifying power of the cosmos with the quiet resolve of the human heart in a time of utter, devastating barrenness.
From Ezra tearing his clothes in the literal ashes, to Abraham haggling for a city, to Jehoshaphat's battlefield choir, all the way to the cosmic poetry of Paul and the psalmists, these magnificent texts continue to serve as a profound mirror for the human condition. So I'm going to leave you with this to think about. How does this ancient divine dialogue continue to shape the way you articulate your own deepest hopes, fears, and wonders today? Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the text in today's Explainer. Keep asking questions and keep learning.